I remember years ago we had an ice storm here in Nashville, and our power went out for several hours. We had a fireplace, and so we old-fashioned fireplace with wood, so we actually kept pretty warm, and so we lit candles and all that kind of deal, and so we sat around the table and got a card game or a board game. We were playing a game, and we're right in the middle of the game. Everybody's having so much fun. It was so neat. We're having all this fun. And all of a sudden, the lights came back on. And our son Dale, some of you know him, jumped up and immediately went over and turned them all back out again. Because we were just having family time and family fun. And, sometimes we get used to all of these modern day things that we enjoy, and we would not want to go without them. But other times we just make do with what we have. And that's not always a bad thing. The challenge of Jesus in these verses that were just read to us in Matthew chapter 6, of course, you're right in the middle of the mountain message of Jesus, the greatest sermon ever preached. And in the middle of this mountain message, Jesus says to us, do not worry. Don't worry about what you eat. Don't worry about what you're going to have to drink. Don't worry about your clothing, he says. For the Gentiles eagerly seek these things. He says, you can spend all of your time worried about this and worried about that. You can spend all of your time chasing after all of the minor things of life, the minutia of life. But he says in verse 32, even people who do not believe in God do that. These are the kinds of things that the Gentiles, the non-believers, these are what they worry about. But he turns to his followers and he says, not you. Instead, he says in verse 33, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And all of this God's going to provide. And he concludes this section by saying in verse 34, so, conclusion, do not worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will take care of itself. Every day has enough troubles of its own. This entire context in the middle part of this mountain message of Jesus, this entire context, I hope you understand, is about the battle for the mind, the battle for your thinking. And you can give your mind over to trust, or you can give your mind over to anxiety. In fact, let's back up a few verses and just refresh our minds. Beginning in verse 25, Jesus says, for this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you eat or what you drink, nor for the body as to what you will put on. Is not your life more than food and the body than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive. So clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace. Will he not much more clothe you? Oh, you of little faith, do not worry, he says. Jesus says, he says something we all know, but we forget. Because we get so wrapped up and we get so caught up in this life and the anxieties and the drama that just keeps swirling. And Jesus said, God's going to take care of you. God takes care of his kids. God takes care of his children. Care of his kids. God takes care of his children. God's going to provide. Do you believe in providence? There's some words that define themselves. If you look in the word providence, there's the word, there's the definition. Provide. God is going to provide. for us. Now, here's the deal. You either believe that or you don't. You either come to develop faith trust or you don't. That's why he says again and again, do not worry. Why? Because worry, ladies and gentlemen, is the ultimate faith killer. It just is. If we were to list if we could come up with a list of the top 10 sins, I doubt worry is going to make the list. You know, our Catholic friends take sins and they divide them into mortal and venial. You know, the mortal sins, the really bad sins, and the venial sins, the not so bad sins. I think in our minds, often we take worry and anxiety and put them in the not so bad. But Jesus says, you need to wait, stop. And the reason he says so much in the Sermon on the Mount about worry, and by the way, he says more in the Sermon on the Mount about worry than he talks about any other thing. And the reason he does is because worry at its core says, I don't know that I trust God. We talk about water and oil do not mix. They are called immiscible properties, water and oil. But the same thing is true of worry and faith. Worry and faith are immiscible properties. They do not mix. And Jesus doesn't brush off our tendency and says, now, don't worry. Just, don't worry. He says, stop it. Stop. Verse 25, verse 31, verse 34, stop. Because Satan doesn't care how he gets you and how he gets me. He doesn't care. He can get us through covetousness. He can get us through greed and love of money. He can get us through anger and bitterness in our heart and hatred toward another person. He can get us through lust and sensuality and pornography. He can get us through addiction of one kind or the other, but he can also get us through indifference and apathy. And he can also get you through worry. Worry. And we play right into his hands. And I'll tell you why this is so important. Solomon says this in Proverbs 23 and verse 7. You are what you think. You are what you think. As a man thinks, that's who he really is. And in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5, he says, you need to think about what you think about. And you need to take those thoughts and you need to take them captive and you need to take them to God. Take every thought captive, he says, to Christ. You better think about what you think about. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, whatever is excellent, let your mind dwell on these things. Think about what you think about. The problem is Satan wants you to dwell on other things. Satan wants you to dwell on things that are going to get you all worked up. He wants you to dwell on things that are going to get you anxious and you're going to be worried. Listen, I know people, you do too, who worry about their past. They worry about the mistakes they have made. They worry about their regrets. They worry about their sins. They allow their past to hijack their mind. That's all they think about. I know people who worry about the future. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we conjure up all of these what if scenarios, most of which, by the way, are never going to happen, but it doesn't stop us from worrying about the imaginable. And so we worry about the past and we worry about the future, and people worry about the present because we are a discontented culture. And if you peel away the layers of discontent like an onion, do you know what you're going to find at the core of discontent? I'm not in control. And if I don't feel in control, then I'm going to worry. So people worry about the past, they worry about the future, they worry about the present. One lady came to talk to me and she said, I need to talk to you because I got a big problem. I said, what is it? She said, Brother Adams, I worry because I think I worry too much. I said, yeah, you got a problem. Jesus says, stop worrying. And he doesn't just brush it aside and say, oh, everybody worries. The whole point of the mountain message, ladies and gentlemen, is quit being like everyone else. You're the salt of the earth. Quit being like everyone else. You're the light of the world. Quit being like everyone else. Do not worry. Quit being like everyone else. The whole point of the sermon. Here's my PowerPoint right here. So I wrote down on my slide, says, worry, what is it? What is this thing? We talk about worry. What is it? You know, the Greek term means to take the mind and divide it. A divided mind. In other words, the person who worries has a mind that has become divided. It is a mind that has become distracted. The Germans use this word, and the root meaning of the German word means to strangle. And it reminds me of what Jesus said in Matthew 13 and verse 22. The worries of the world choke the word, strangles the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And if our life is strangled, choked, then you can't bear the fruit of the Spirit. Love and joy and peace and patience and long suffering. You can't bear any of that fruit because fruit cannot grow in strangled soil. It's an impossibility. This is greatly illustrated for us in Luke the 10th chapter. In Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 38. Luke 10, beginning in verse 38. You know the scene. As they were traveling along, he came to a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who was seated at the Lord's feet listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations. And she came up to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, are you worried and bothered about so many things? Only one is necessary, for Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken from her. Now, the first thing I want to say about that is, it's easy for us to come down hard on Martha. And I've heard sermons that do that. They just come down really hard on Martha. But I have to ask you this question. If Jesus announced to you that he wants to come to your house for lunch today, would you not be a little anxious about that? Would you not want to make sure everything's kind of right? Wouldn't you want to rush home quickly and kind of pick up? I want to tell you something. What Martha did was important. Because Martha was all about hospitality. So what Martha did was important, very important. But the problem was Martha lost sight of what in that moment was even more important. And she allowed the important to distract her from the most important. I'm kind of a baseball guy. I love the sport. I love the history of the sport. And I love all the nuances of the game and different things. And one of my favorite baseball stories comes out of 1957. When the Milwaukee Braves, they were the Milwaukee Braves long before they ever became the Atlanta Braves. The Milwaukee Braves were playing the New York Yankees in the 1957 World Series, which the Braves won, by the way. And baseball being baseball, from Little League to Major League, you understand that the catchers become very adept at trying to distract the batter. And so from Little League, they say you can't hit, and you're ugly, and your mother's ugly, or whatever, to the major leagues where they get a lot more creative. Yogi Berra was the best. And so in this particular game, Henry Hank Aaron came to the plate. And as he settled into the batter's box and looked at the pitcher, Yogi Berra said, "Have you ever noticed your bat? The words Louisville Slugger are upside down." And Aaron never smiled, never stepped out of the batter's box, never took his eye off the pitcher, and the pitcher threw, and it was strike one. And as Yogi's throwing the ball back to the pitcher, he says, "That's the craziest bat I've ever seen. You need to look at the Louisville Slugger on your bat is upside down." And Aaron never took his eyes off the pitcher, and the pitcher threw. And Aaron hit the ball 440 feet over the center field fence. And as he came around third and touched home, Henry Aaron said to Yogi Berra, "I didn't come here to read." Point taken. What was Yogi doing? He was trying to distract the hitter. And that's what Satan does. He tries to distract us in any way that he can. Because worried people are distracted people. And that's what Jesus said, "Martha, you're distracted. You're distracted and you're worried." Same word as in Matthew 6. You're worried about so many things. So worried people are distracted people. Worried people are also dissatisfied people. In that passage in Philippians 4 and verse 6, he says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication let your requests be made known to God." Worry about nothing, pray about everything. And then in the same context, down in verse 11 of Philippians chapter 4, Paul says, "I've learned the secret. I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I'm in." Because you see, lack of contentment is really a trust issue. And a trust issue is really a God issue. And what Jesus is qualifying for us in the Sermon on the Mount, do you trust God? Do you trust Him? And so Jesus gives us some counsel. So he says, do not worry about your life. That's in verse 25. Do not worry about your needs. That's in verse 31. Do not worry about tomorrow. That's in verse 34. And as I was reading this again, it dawned on me, and I wrote this down in my notes a couple days ago. I wrote down if you're taking notes, write down 5 and then 2 and then 2. 5, 2, 2. Because it's interesting what Jesus does. He asks 5 questions. And he gives 2 illustrations. And he gives 2 prescriptions to solve this problem. His 5 questions are, beginning in verse 25, and by the way, all the questions he asks, all 5 of them are rhetorical. They're all obvious. His first question is not your life more than food and the body than clothing? It's not a hard question. If ever there was a yes question, that's it. And then in verse 26, question number 2, have to do with the birds. He says, aren't you worth more than the birds? Not a hard question, is it? Question 3, verse 27, can worry add 1 inch to your height or 1 year to your life? Some of the translations differ on that. And some think it's talking about height, some think it's talking about length of life. You know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Can worry add to either of those? No. It's a pretty simple question. Number 4, verse 28, does it make sense to worry about what you wear? No. Verse 30, won't God do more for you than he does for the grass of the field? Yes. So Jesus asks 5 questions, and the answers are 5 obvious answers. I love that verse in Psalm 37 and verse 25. David says, I've been young, and now I'm old. I've not seen the righteous forsaken or his descendants begging for bread. David says, what I've seen is God takes care of his people. Now, when Jesus says all of this in the Sermon on the Mount, he's not saying to us, just sit back and relax and sip some iced tea on the porch and just wait for God to send you the check. That's not what he's saying. And he gives 2 illustrations of that. The first illustration has to do with the animal world. And he says in verse 26, look at the birds. They don't sow, they don't reap. Does that mean they don't do anything? Are you kidding? We sit out on our back patio and watch Julie's got all these bird feeders, and I tell you what, they make you tired. They're busy. They're either building nests or sitting on their eggs or going out and getting more food or storing their food or migrating south or whatever. They're busy. And they sing a lot, don't they? The point is, if birds follow their instincts, God provides. And he says to you and me, if we follow God's plan for us, then he's going to provide. The birds aren't worried. So Jesus says, why are you? So he goes to the animal world, and then beginning in verse 28, he goes to the plant world. He talks about the lilies, the foliage, the flowers. They're not all that worked up about what they wear. They don't go around complaining, nor do they go around comparing, and neither should we. He says at the end of verse 30, don't you think God's going to do even more for you? So when we talk about learning about God's prevision and God's provision and God's providence and God's promises, Jesus said, look at the birds, take a lesson. Look at the flowers, take a lesson. If God cares for them, he's going to take care of you. I love this poem. Said the robin to the sparrow, I should really like to know why these anxious humans rush about and worry so. Said the sparrow to the robin, friend, I think it must be that they have no heavenly Father, such as cares for you and me. 5 simple questions. 2 simple illustrations. And then the great physician writes us a prescription. 2 prescriptions. Number 1, priorities, he says. That's in verse 33. Seek first his kingdom. Seek first his kingdom. I believe the idea of kingdom there speaks of God's rule in your life. God's rule in your life. Listen, God is either on the throne or he's not. And if he's on the throne, then why are you all worked up and worried? We live in crazy times. And how many 24/7 news channels are there? I don't know. But I know this. I know some Christians who get way too worked up over politics. Amen? And I will tell you this, one of the best things you can do is turn off the news. I don't care what your favorite, it doesn't matter to me. Turn off the news and get back into the book. And maybe go back and start reading in the book of Daniel again, because in the book of Daniel, God's message in the book of Daniel is God rules in the affairs of men. God's on the throne. What's your worry? What's your worry? If God's on the throne, act like it. Act like it. You know, in the book of Daniel, God ruled that Babylonian superpower through the narcissist Nebuchadnezzar. And then God ruled that Babylonian superpower through the imbecile Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he displayed both of those traits. And the whole point of that message is God's in control. And you have a connection, you have a voice to him. So he says, seek first his kingdom. Seek first the fact that he rules. And secondly, his righteousness. If your goal in life is to please him, if that's what your life is all about, then like dominoes, every other thing's just going to fall into place. It just is. Priorities is prescription number one. And prescription number two is simplicity. Verse 34. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. Every day has enough trouble of its own. Live a day at a time, he says. Don't mess up today by borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Because Jesus says, today's hard enough. And God's going to give you what you need to get through today. And God's going to give you what you need to get through tomorrow. But it's not going to be given to you until tomorrow. So he says, do not worry. Keep it simple. I love simple. We've kind of had simple this morning. I love simple. Put him first. Put him first. And trust him with your needs. We sing the song sometimes, hand in hand with Jesus. That's what this is saying, hand in hand with Jesus. And together we just take it a day at a time. I'm glad Julie can be with me here this morning. Because of her work, she has a podcast that comes out every Wednesday. And she interviews a lot of interesting people. And a couple of weeks ago, she interviewed Elise Nash from Southern Indiana. Some of you who follow her story on Facebook understand she's a 39-year-old mother of two who was given 4 to 6 weeks to live with a very rapidly growing brain tumor. And that young lady handled not only life, but she handled her soon-to-be death with more grace and maturity and faith than I have ever seen. Elise passed away this past Wednesday night. And she said she was okay with that. She was okay at age 39 meeting Jesus sooner rather than later. But at the end of Julie's podcast, Julie asked Elise this question. Is there one thing you want us to know? Is there one thing you want to leave us with? And here's her answer. While you have time, make it right. And don't wait around. While you have time, make it right. And don't wait around. That is powerful. We sing this song of invite. What's the song?
Number 260.
Number 260. What's the title?
Hand in hand.
Oh, okay. Did we work this out in advance or what? No. Okay, I love it. We're going to sing this song, hand in hand with Jesus. Because when you hold his hand, like holding the hand of a parent when you were little, walking along the path at night, you didn't worry because your strength came through the connection you had with that parent. And when you hold the hand of Jesus, you don't have to worry. Whether you see him sooner or whether you see him later, let him take care of you. And if you need to make something right, don't wait around. Won't you come while we stand and sing?